Before we dive into this incredible story that will restore your faith in humanity, make sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell. This tale of unexpected kindness and its remarkable aftermath will touch your heart in ways you never imagined. It was a bitter, cold Wednesday morning in Riverside, the kind that makes even the bravest souls think twice about leaving their warm beds. Jack Thompson stood in his workshop, Thompson's Auto Repair, his calloused hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee as he watched the season's first snowflakes dance outside the garage door. At 52, Jack had seen just about every car problem imaginable in his 30 years as a mechanic, but it wasn't the machines that kept him up at night. It was the stories behind them. The small town's earliest risers were just beginning. Their daily routines, the smell of fresh bread wafted from Carol's bakery across the street, mixing with the familiar scent of oil and metal that perpetually hung in Jack's shop. He took another sip of his coffee, studying the family photos that lined his office wall, moments frozen in time, reminding him of simpler days. "Morning, boss." Mike Henderson's cheerful voice echoed through the workshop as he entered, shaking snow from his boots. The young apprentice had been working with Jack for 3 years now, bringing youth and energy to the aging garage. "Looks like it's going to be a quiet one today." Jack nodded, but something in his gut told him differently. 30 years in the business had given him a sixth sense about these things. "We'll see, Mike, we'll see." As if on cue, the distinct sound of a struggling engine caught their attention. Through the falling snow, they could make out the shape of an old Honda Civic limping its way toward the shop, its exhaust leaving a trail of white smoke in the cold morning air. The car barely made it to the entrance before dying completely, its final wheeze echoing in the quiet street. Out stepped a woman in her mid-30s, her face etched with worry and exhaustion. She was wearing clothes that spoke of comfort over style, a worn sweater, jeans with a small tear at the knee, and boots that had seen better days. Behind her, a young boy's face pressed against the passenger window, his breath fogging up the glass. "Mom," Jack called out, already moving toward the vehicle. "Looks like you could use some help." The woman, Emma Parker, as she would later introduce herself, tried to smile, but her trembling lips betrayed her anxiety. "I don't know what happened," she explained, her voice catching. "It was fine yesterday, and now..." She gestured helplessly at the smoking hood. "I have to get Tommy to school and then make it to my job interview by 9, but..." She glanced at her watch, and Jack could see the hope draining from her face. Jack moved closer to the car, his experienced eyes already assessing the situation. "Tommy, is it?" he called out to the boy in the car, who nodded shyly. "How about you come inside where it's warm? Mike here makes the best hot chocolate in Riverside." He winked at his apprentice, who immediately caught on and headed for the small break room. As Tommy scrambled out of the car, clutching his backpack, Jack turned to Emma. "Let's take a look at what we're dealing with here." The problem was immediately apparent to Jack's trained eye: a blown head gasket, one of the more serious and expensive issues a car could face. He watched Emma's face as he explained the situation, seeing the color drain from her cheeks at the estimated cost. I can't afford that," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "I just moved here last week, started over after..." She trailed off, her eyes distant. "The interview today, it was supposed to be our fresh start." Jack stood there for a moment, snow collecting on his shoulders as he studied the woman before him. In her eyes, he saw something familiar, a look he'd seen in his own mirror years ago, when life had dealt him cards that seemed impossible to play. "Tell you what," he said, making a decision that would set in motion events he could never have anticipated. "Let me give you and Tommy a ride to where you need to be. I'll take a closer look at the car today, see what I can do. Maybe it's not as bad as it looks." Emma's eyes widened with disbelief. But how will I pay for... Jack held up a hand, stopping her protest. Let's worry about that later. Right now, let's get Tommy to school and you to that interview. As Jack led them to his truck, he couldn't have known that this simple act of kindness would trigger a chain of events that would change not just his life, but the entire community of Riverside. He couldn't have known that the next day, his phone would ring with a call that would make him question everything he thought he knew about fate and coincidence. The morning after helping Emma and Tommy, Jack arrived at his shop earlier than usual. Something about their encounter had stirred memories he'd long tried to forget. As he unlocked the front door of Thompson's auto repair, the weight of Emma's car keys felt heavy in his pocket. The previous day had gone smoothly enough. Tommy made it to Cedar Grove Elementary with time to spare, his face bright with excitement after Jack let him operate the truck's radio during their ride. Emma arrived at her interview 10 minutes early, smoothing her worn blazer with trembling hands before disappearing into the Riverside Community Center. Now, in the quiet of early morning, Jack stood over Emma's Honda, his mind wandering to the devastating diagnosis he'd confirmed after they'd left. The head gasket wasn't just blown, the engine block was cracked, and several other critical components needed replacement. The repair costs would easily exceed the car's value. Mike hadn't arrived yet, and Jack welcomed the solitude as he sipped his coffee, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. He'd spent half the night tossing and turning, thinking about Emma's situation. Her words echoed in his mind. Started over after. The unfinished sentence hung in the air, heavy with unspoken pain. The phone rang, cutting through his thoughts like a knife through butter. Jack glanced at the clock, 6:47 a.m., too early for customers. Thompson's auto repair, he answered, his voice still gravelly from lack of sleep. The silence on the other end stretched for a moment before a man's voice spoke, clear and deliberate. Is this Jack Thompson, the mechanic who helped Emma Parker yesterday? Jack straightened, something in the caller's tone demanding attention. Yes, that's me. Who's calling? My name is David Wilson. I'm the pastor at Riverside Community Church. The man paused, and Jack could hear papers rustling in the background. I need to tell you something about Emma Parker and her son. Something you should know. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He'd lived in Riverside long enough to know Pastor Wilson's reputation for helping those in need. Is everything all right with them? That depends on your definition of all right, Pastor Wilson replied. Emma's story. It's not mine to tell completely, but I feel you should know why your help yesterday meant more than you could imagine. You see, 3 months ago, Emma and Tommy lost everything in a horrific accident. Her husband, Daniel, was a firefighter in their hometown. He died saving a family from a burning building. Jack sank into his office chair, the phone pressed tight against his ear. The insurance money barely covered the funeral expenses, Pastor Wilson continued. Emma couldn't afford to keep their house, and the memories were too painful anyway. She chose Riverside for a fresh start because of our town's reputation for helping neighbors in need. That job interview yesterday, it was for a position at our community center's after-school program. The morning light filtered through the dusty garage windows, illuminating the family photos on Jack's wall. His own daughter's smile beamed back at him from her college graduation picture. Pastor, Jack's voice was rough with emotion. Why are you telling me this? Because, Jack, I've been praying for someone to help them since they arrived last week. When Emma called me last night crying about the kindness of a stranger who helped her and Tommy, I knew my prayers had been answered. But there's more. Jack listened as Pastor Wilson revealed that Emma's late husband, Daniel, had grown up in Riverside. In fact, his father had owned the very garage Jack now operated, selling it 20 years ago when he retired to Florida. This shop, it was where Daniel learned to be a mechanic before deciding to become a firefighter instead. And now, by some divine orchestration, his widow's car breaks down right at its doorstep. The revelation hit Jack like a physical force. He looked around his shop, with new eyes, imagining a young Daniel learning the trade in this very space. "I'm not telling you this to pressure you, Jack," Pastor Wilson said softly. "But I believe there are no coincidences in this life. Sometimes we're placed exactly where we need to be to help others heal." After hanging up, Jack sat motionless, watching dust motes dance in the morning light. The shop felt different now, charged with meaning he couldn't quite grasp. His eyes fell on Emma's Honda, and suddenly, the decision he'd been wrestling with all night became crystal clear. Mike arrived to find Jack already elbow-deep in the Honda's engine, parts carefully laid out on a clean shop towel. "I thought that one was beyond saving, boss," Mike said, hanging up his jacket. Jack wiped his hands on a rag, a determined look in his eyes. "Nothing's beyond saving if you're willing to put in the work, kid. Grab your tools."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"We've got a long day ahead of us. But the costs," Mike started. "Some things are worth more than money," Jack replied, thinking of Tommy's shy smile and Emma's quiet dignity. "Sometimes we're given a chance to be part of something bigger than ourselves. Today's that day." As they worked through the morning, Jack shared Pastor Wilson's call with Mike, watching understanding dawn in the young man's eyes. Together, they tackled the massive repair job with a sense of purpose that transcended mere mechanical work. By late afternoon, word had spread through Riverside's tight-knit community. Carol from the bakery appeared with fresh coffee and donuts. Bob Martinez, the town's police officer, stopped by with spare parts from his brother's salvage yard. Even Rachel from Sunrise Diner brought over sandwiches, saying simply, "I heard about Emma and Tommy. We take care of our own here." What started as one man's decision to help became a community effort, each person contributing what they could. The story of Daniel Parker, the local boy who became a hero firefighter, and his family's unexpected return to Riverside touched hearts and opened wallets. As the sun began to set, Jack stood back, surveying their work. The Honda wasn't just repaired, it was renewed. New parts gleamed alongside carefully restored ones, a testament to what people could accomplish when they came together. Tomorrow, he would call Emma with the news. Tomorrow, he would tell her about her husband's connection to this very shop. Tomorrow, he would watch as another chapter in Riverside's story of community and kindness unfolded. But for now, Jack Thompson stood in his garage, surrounded by the tools of his trade and the evidence of human goodness, knowing that sometimes the most important repairs weren't made to engines at all, but to hearts. The morning Jack planned to call Emma dawned bright and clear. The previous day's snow transformed into diamond-like frost coating every surface in Riverside. He arrived at the shop just as the sun peeked over the horizon, its golden rays catching on the freshly repaired Honda that stood ready in the garage. The events of yesterday still felt surreal. After Pastor Wilson's revelatory phone call, the entire community had rallied around the repair effort in ways Jack had never expected. His phone had been buzzing constantly with messages from townspeople asking how they could help Emma and Tommy. Jack pulled out his phone, Emma's number ready to dial, when he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching on frost-covered gravel. Looking up, he saw Emma herself walking toward the shop, Tommy's small hand clutched in hers. The boy was wearing a too-big coat that someone from the community center had donated, his breath creating small clouds in the cold morning air. "I hope it's not too early," Emma called out, her voice carrying a mix of anxiety and hope. "Tommy couldn't sleep last night wondering about the car, and honestly, neither could I." Jack stepped out to meet them, noticing how Emma's eyes darted nervously to the garage where her Honda sat covered by a tarp. He'd planned to ease into the story of her husband's connection to the shop, but looking at their worried faces, he knew the direct approach was best. "Before we talk about the car," Jack said gently, "there's something you need to know about this place." He gestured to the building behind him. "Yesterday, I received a call that helped me understand why your car breaking down here wasn't just a coincidence." As they stood in the crisp morning air, Jack shared everything Pastor Wilson had told him about Daniel Parker's history with the garage. He watched as Emma's eyes widened with recognition, tears gathering at the corners. Tommy, old enough to understand, but young enough to still see magic in coincidences, gripped his mother's hand tighter. "Danny used to talk about this place," Emma whispered, her free hand reaching out to touch the weathered wall of the garage. "He said it was where he first fell in love with fixing things, even though he eventually chose a different path. But I never made the connection. I never knew this was the same shop." Jack led them inside, where the morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating decades of history trapped in the building's bones. Yesterday, after learning about Daniel, something amazing happened. The whole town came together. Everyone wanted to help in some way. With careful steps, he guided them to where their car sat beneath the tarp. "Emma, Tommy, I want you to know that what we did here wasn't just about fixing a car. It was about honoring Daniel's memory and welcoming you both home." With a flourish that betrayed his usually steady hands, Jack pulled away the tarp. The Honda gleamed in the morning light, its exterior washed and waxed to a shine it probably hadn't seen in years. But the real miracle lay under the hood, where new parts nestled alongside lovingly restored ones, creating a symphony of mechanical perfection. "How?" Emma's voice cracked as she ran her hand along the car's hood. "Jack, I can't possibly afford—" "You don't have to," he interrupted softly. "The parts came from all over town. Bob Martinez's brother donated what he could from his salvage yard. Mike and I provided the labor. Carol from the bakery kept us fed. Rachel from the diner spread the word. Even the kids from Cedar Grove Elementary, where Tommy goes now, collected spare change when they heard the story." Tommy, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Dad used to work here?" His small hand touched the toolbox nearest to him with reverence. Jack smiled, moving to a corner of the shop where he'd set up a surprise. "He did, and this morning I found something special." He lifted an old photograph from his workbench, carefully preserved in a new frame. It showed a young man in overalls, grinning proudly next to a restored Chevy, the shop's old sign visible in the background. "This was your dad, Tommy, one of his first restoration projects." Emma's hand flew to her mouth as she recognized her late husband's young face. Tommy took the photo with trembling hands, his eyes wide with wonder. "There's more," Jack continued, his voice gentle. "The town. Well, they want you to know you're not alone here. Pastor Wilson helped set up a fund at the community center. It's not just for the car, it's to help you and Tommy build your new life here." The tears that had been threatening finally spilled over Emma's cheeks. "Why? Why would everyone do this for us?" "Because 20 years ago, Daniel Parker learned in this very shop that helping others isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about giving people hope. He carried that lesson with him when he became a firefighter, right up until his final heroic act. Now it's our turn to pass that lesson on." As if on cue, the door chimed as Mike arrived for work, carrying a box of Carol's fresh pastries. Behind him came Rachel from the diner, Pastor Wilson, and what seemed like half the town, all wearing smiles and carrying various gifts. Groceries, warm clothes, school supplies for Tommy. The small shop filled with warmth despite the winter. chill outside as neighbors introduced themselves to Emma and Tommy. Stories about Daniel flowed freely, each person either remembering him from his youth or having heard about his sacrifice. Tommy moved from person to person, proudly showing the photo of his father, while Emma stood in the midst of it all, overwhelmed by the outpouring of love from these former strangers. Jack watched it all from his usual spot by his workbench, his coffee growing cold in his hands. He thought about how a single act of kindness, sparked by a mysterious phone call, had snowballed into something far greater than himself. The shop that had once taught a young Daniel Parker about helping others had become the catalyst for healing his family's broken hearts. Looking at Tommy's beaming face as he showed the photo to yet another townsperson, Jack knew that while they couldn't bring Daniel back, they could ensure his legacy lived on in the very place where it all began. 6 months had passed since that fateful morning when Emma's car broke down at Thompson's auto repair. Spring had melted into summer, and Riverside had bloomed not just with flowers, but with renewed purpose and community spirit. Jack stood in his shop doorway, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The evening air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and carols baking from across the street. His hands, though clean from a day's work, still carried the familiar roughness of a life spent fixing things. The shop had changed in subtle ways since Emma and Tommy came into their lives. The old photograph of Daniel Parker now held a place of honor on the wall, alongside other memories of the shop's history. But the biggest changes weren't physical. They were in the hearts of everyone involved. Emma had flourished in her role. At the community center's after-school program, the children adored her, especially when she shared stories about their town's everyday heroes, including her late husband. Tommy, now sporting a junior mechanic's apron that Mike had specially made for him, spent many afternoons at the shop learning the basics of car repair, just as his father had years ago. Jack smiled, remembering how just that morning, Tommy had successfully changed his first tire under Mike's watchful guidance. The boy's proud grin had been eerily similar to his father's in that old photograph. The sound of approaching footsteps drew Jack from his reverie. Pastor Wilson walked up, his usual warm smile in place. "Evening, Jack. Got a minute?" They settled into the comfortable chairs Jack had added to the shop's waiting area. The pastor pulled out an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Remember that fund we set up for Emma and Tommy? Well, something remarkable has happened." He handed Jack the envelope. Inside was a letter from a neighboring town's fire department. As Jack read, his eyes widened. The story of Daniel Parker's connection to Thompson's auto repair and how the community had rallied around his family had spread beyond Riverside's borders. Fire departments across the state had been inspired to create a network of support for families of fallen first responders. "They're calling it the Parker Protocol," Pastor Wilson explained, his voice thick with emotion. "When a first responder falls in the line of duty, the entire community mobilizes, not just with immediate help, but with long-term support. Job opportunities, housing assistance, educational support for the children. They're using what happened. Here is a model." Jack sat back, overwhelmed by the implications. What had started as a simple act of kindness had grown into something far bigger than their small town. The shop's door chimed and Emma walked in, Tommy bouncing excitedly beside her. The boy was clutching a paper in his hands, barely containing his enthusiasm. "Look what Tommy wrote for his school assignment," Emma said, her eyes shining with pride. "He was asked to write about his hero." Tommy thrust the paper toward Jack, who took it carefully. The title, written in bold, childish letters, read, "My Three Heroes, My Dad, Mr. Jack, and Our Town." As Jack read the essay aloud, his voice grew husky with emotion. Tommy had written about his father's bravery, about Jack's kindness, and about how an entire town had shown him what it meant to be part of a community. The boy had concluded by declaring his own ambition to become both a mechanic and a firefighter, helping people fix both their cars and their problems. Emma wiped tears from her eyes as Jack finished reading. "I never thought we'd find home again after Danny died," she said softly. "But Riverside, you all gave us more than just help. You gave us hope, purpose, and family." Pastor Wilson smiled knowingly. "That's the real legacy of this shop, isn't it? It's not just about fixing cars, it's about fixing hearts and rebuilding lives." Just then, Mike burst through the door, excitement written across his face. "Boss, you won't believe this. Remember that old Chevy that Daniel restored in that photo? Well, I think I found it." The revelation sent a jolt through the room. The car, as it turned out, had been sitting in a barn just outside town for years. The owner, upon hearing the story of Daniel Parker and Thompson's auto repair, had offered to sell it to the shop for a nominal price. "Tommy," Jack said, turning to the wide-eyed boy, "how would you like to help restore your dad's first project?" "Car? We could work on it together just like he did with my predecessor." Tommy's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "Really? Can we make it exactly like in the picture?" "Even better," Mike chimed in. "We could document the whole restoration process. Share it online. Show people how a community can come together to preserve a legacy." As they discussed plans for the restoration, more townspeople began dropping by. Carol with her end-of-day pastries, Rachel from the diner with coffee, Bob Martinez still in his police uniform. It had become a kind of informal tradition over the past months, these evening gatherings at Thompson's Auto Repair. Standing there, surrounded by the people who had become family, Jack realized that the mysterious phone call he'd received 6 months ago had done more than just reveal a connection to the past. It had set in motion a chain of events that transformed their entire community. The shop that had once taught Daniel Parker about kindness and service had come full circle, becoming a beacon of hope for his family and inspiring others to create similar support systems across the state. The Parker Protocol would ensure that no first responder's family would have to face their struggles alone. As the summer evening wore on, Jack watched Tommy showing Carol how to check tire pressure, using the skills he'd learned that morning. Emma chatted with Rachel about expanding the community center's programs. Pastor Wilson and Bob Martinez discussed ways to implement the Parker Protocol in neighboring towns. And there, in the gentle buzz of conversation and community, Jack understood that sometimes the greatest repairs don't require tools at all. Just open hearts and willing hands. The summer sun beat down on Riverside as Thompson's Auto Repair buzzed with unprecedented activity. The old Chevy that Daniel Parker had restored years ago now sat in the center of the shop, its faded paint and rusted panels a testament to the years it had spent forgotten in a barn. Tommy stood beside the car, running his small hand along its weathered surface, his eyes bright with possibility. The pastor pulled out an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Remember that fund we set up for Emma and Tommy? Well, something remarkable has happened." He handed Jack the envelope. Inside was a letter from a neighboring town's fire department. As Jack read, his eyes widened. The story of Daniel Parker's connection to Thompson's Auto Repair and how the community had rallied around his family had spread beyond Riverside's borders. Fire departments across the state had been inspired to create a network of support for families of fallen first responders. "They're calling it the Parker Protocol," Pastor Wilson explained, his voice thick with emotion. "When a first responder falls in the line of duty, the entire community mobilizes, not just with immediate help, but with long-term support. Job opportunities, housing assistance, educational support for the children. They're using what happened. Here is a model." Jack sat back, overwhelmed by the implications. What had started as a simple act of kindness had grown into something far bigger than their small town. The shop's door chimed and Emma walked in, Tommy bouncing excitedly beside her. The boy was clutching a paper in his hands, barely containing his enthusiasm. "Look what Tommy wrote for his school assignment," Emma said, her eyes shining with pride. He was asked to write about his hero. Tommy thrust the paper toward Jack, who took it carefully. The title, written in bold, childish letters, read, "My three heroes, my dad, Mr. Jack, and our town." As Jack read the essay aloud, his voice grew husky with emotion. Tommy had written about his father's bravery, about Jack's kindness, and about how an entire town had shown him what it meant to be part of a community. The boy had concluded by declaring his own ambition to become both a mechanic and a firefighter, helping people fix both their cars and their problems. Emma wiped tears from her eyes as Jack finished reading. "I never thought we'd find home again after Danny died," she said softly. "But Riverside, you all gave us more than just help. You gave us hope, purpose, and family." Pastor Wilson smiled knowingly. "That's the real legacy of this shop, isn't it? It's not just about fixing cars, it's about fixing hearts and rebuilding lives." Just then, Mike burst through the door, excitement written across his face. "Boss, you won't believe this. Remember that old Chevy that Daniel restored in that photo? Well, I think I found it." The revelation sent a jolt through the room. The car, as it turned out, had been sitting in a barn just outside town for years. The owner, upon hearing the story of Daniel Parker and Thompson's auto repair, had offered to sell it to the shop for a nominal price. "Tommy," Jack said, turning to the wide-eyed boy, "how would you like to help restore your dad's first project?" "Car? We could work on it together just like he did with my predecessor." Tommy's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "Really? Can we make it exactly like in the picture?" "Even better," Mike chimed in. "We could document the whole restoration process. Share it online. Show people how a community can come together to preserve a legacy." As they discussed plans for the restoration, more townspeople began dropping by. Carol with her end-of-day pastries, Rachel from the diner with coffee, Bob Martinez still in his police uniform. It had become a kind of informal tradition over the past months, these evening gatherings at Thompson's auto repair. Standing there, surrounded by the people who had become family, Jack realized that the mysterious phone call he'd received 6 months ago had done more than just reveal a connection to the past. It had set in motion a chain of events that transformed their entire community. The shop that had once taught Daniel Parker about kindness and service had come full circle, becoming a beacon of hope for his family and inspiring others to create similar support systems across the state. The Parker Protocol would ensure that no first responder's family would have to face their struggles alone. As the summer evening wore on, Jack watched Tommy showing Carol how to check tire pressure, using the skills he'd learned that morning. Emma chatted with Rachel about expanding the community center's programs. Pastor Wilson and Bob Martinez discussed ways to implement the Parker Protocol in neighboring towns. And there, in the gentle buzz of conversation and community, Jack understood that sometimes the greatest repairs don't require tools at all. Just open hearts and willing hands. The summer sun beat down on Riverside as Thompson's auto repair buzzed with unprecedented activity. The old Chevy that Daniel Parker had restored years ago now sat in the center of the shop, its faded paint and rusted panels a testament to the years it had spent forgotten in a barn. Tommy stood beside the car, running his small hand along its weathered surface, his eyes bright with possibility. "Not just Dad's Chevy. I want to learn how to help people like you and Dad did." Jack looked at Emma, who nodded her approval with misty eyes. "Tell you what, Tommy, every Saturday morning you can be my official junior mechanic. We'll start with the basics, Oil changes, tire rotations, simple maintenance, just like your dad learned. The boy's face lit up with joy, and for a moment Jack could have sworn he saw Daniel smile in his son's expression. The shop filled with the warm laughter of friends who had become family, united by a story of loss, love, and the healing power of community. As the summer day drew to a close, Jack stood in his shop doorway, watching Tommy and Emma drive home in their now reliable Honda. The old Chevy sat patiently in the shop, waiting for its rebirth. Tomorrow, they would begin the real work of restoration, guided by Daniel's careful notes and surrounded by a community that had learned the true meaning of support and service. 3 weeks into the Chevy's restoration, Thompson's auto repair had transformed into something between a working garage and a living museum. Daniel Parker's detailed notes and diagrams covered one wall, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. Next to them hung photographs documenting the progress. Tommy's small hands learning to sand rusted metal, Mike teaching him how to properly hold various tools, Emma discovering her own talent for detail work while helping restore the interior. The early morning light filtered through the shop windows as Jack arrived. Earlier than usual, he paused in the doorway, taking in the sight of the partially restored Chevy. They'd made remarkable progress, but today was special. Today, they would attempt something that had been weighing on his mind since the project began. The sound of tires on gravel announced Mike's arrival. He wasn't alone. A silver-haired man stepped out of the passenger side, his movements deliberate and measured. Jack recognized him immediately from the old shop photos. Tom Miller, the former owner who had taught Daniel Parker everything he knew about cars. "When Mike told me about the project," Tom said by way of greeting, his voice gruff with emotion, "I knew I had to come see it for myself." He moved slowly toward the Chevy, his experienced eyes taking in every detail. Daniel was one of the best students I ever had, not just with cars, with people too. Before Jack could respond, another car pulled up. Emma and Tommy tumbled out, the boy practically vibrating with excitement. He stopped short when he saw the stranger standing by his father's car. "Tommy!" Jack called out. "Come meet someone special. This is Mr. Miller. He taught your dad everything he knew about being a mechanic." Tommy approached cautiously, his notebook clutched to his chest. Tom knelt down, despite his creaking knees, to meet the boy at eye level. "You look just like him, you know. Same careful way of studying things, same spark in your eyes." The morning unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of past and present. Tom shared stories about Daniel's apprenticeship days, each tale adding another piece to the puzzle of who Daniel Parker had been before becoming a firefighter and father. Tommy absorbed every word, his notebook filling with new details about his dad. As the morning wore on, more familiar faces began arriving. Carol brought her signature pastries, Rachel arrived with coffee for everyone, and Pastor Wilson stopped by with Bob Martinez. The shop quickly filled with the warmth of community and shared purpose. "There's something I've been wanting to try," Jack announced, gathering everyone around the Chevy. In Daniel's notes, he mentioned a special technique for getting the engine timing just right. "Tom, I was hoping you could help us with that today." What followed was a masterclass in old-school mechanics. Tom's weathered hands moved with surprising grace as he demonstrated the technique, his voice strong and sure as he explained each step. Tommy watched with rapt attention, occasionally glancing at his father's notes to compare them with Tom's instructions. "Your dad wrote this down perfectly," Tom noted, pointing to a particular diagram in Daniel's notes. "He always had a way of making the complex seem simple. That's what made him such a natural teacher." Emma, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "He used to say the same thing about firefighting, that it wasn't just about knowing the technical aspects, it was about being able to help others understand and feel safe." The parallel wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Just as Daniel had taken the lessons he learned in this shop and applied them to saving lives as a firefighter, his legacy was now helping others in ways no one could have predicted. As the day progressed, more people from town stopped by to witness the restoration in progress. The Parker Protocol had made headlines in regional newspapers, and Riverside had become something of a pilgrimage site for other communities looking to implement similar support systems. You know, Pastor Wilson observed during a quiet moment, when we talk about divine timing, this is what we mean. A broken-down car, a mysterious phone call, a community coming together, it's all part of a bigger picture. Jack nodded, watching Tommy work alongside Tom, the two generations connected by Daniel's memory. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about how sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of kindness. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the shop windows when Tom finally straightened up from under the Chevy's hood. Well, she's ready for the moment of truth. Tommy, would you like to do the honors? With trembling hands and a determined expression, Tommy climbed into the driver's seat. Jack stood beside him, guiding his small hand to the key in the ignition. The shop fell silent as Tommy turned the key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound that brought tears to more than a few eyes, the engine roared to life. It wasn't just any engine noise, it was the distinct, perfect purr that only comes from a motor tuned with expertise and care. Tom's face broke into a proud smile. That's the exact same sound she made when your dad first got her running. He worked for weeks to get that timing just right. The triumph of the moment spread through the shop like a warm wave. Carol dabbed at her eyes with her apron, Rachel hugged Emma, and Bob clapped Mike on the back. But it was Tommy's expression that captured the true magnitude of the achievement. Pure joy, mixed with profound connection to the father he'd lost too soon. "Mr. Jack," Tommy said, his voice barely containing his excitement, "can we record that sound for the documentation?" "Already did, buddy," Mike replied, holding up his phone. "Every second of it. This is going in the official restoration video." As the excitement settled into a comfortable buzz of conversation and celebration, Jack pulled Tom aside. "Thank you for coming today. This means more than you know." Tom's eyes were fixed on Tommy, who was now showing his notebook to anyone who would look. That boy's got his father's spirit, and this shop, it's doing exactly what it was always meant to do. Not just fixing cars, but fixing hearts. The sun was setting when Tom finally prepared to leave, but not before making a promise to return and help with the next phase of the restoration. As the shop slowly emptied, Jack found himself alone with Emma and Tommy, standing before the now quiet Chevy. "Dad would be proud, wouldn't he?" Tommy asked, his small hand resting on the car's fender. Emma pulled him close. "He already is, sweetheart, he already is." The old Chevy's restoration had reached a critical phase. With the engine now purring perfectly, thanks to Tom Miller's expertise, the focus shifted to the bodywork. The summer heat had settled into Riverside like a warm blanket, and Thompson's auto repair hummed with constant activity. Jack stood back, wiping sweat from his brow as he surveyed the morning's progress. Tommy had arrived early, as he did every Saturday, eager to begin what he now called his official apprenticeship. The boy's dedication reminded Jack so much of what Tom had described about young Daniel's early days in the shop. "Mr. Jack," Tommy called from where he was carefully sanding a fender. "I found something." Everyone gathered around as Tommy pointed to what he'd uncovered beneath layers of old paint, a small engraving in the metal. As Jack leaned in closer, his heart caught in his throat. There, barely visible, were the initials DP and a date from 20 years ago. "Your father's signature," Jack explained softly. Mechanics sometimes do that, leave their mark on special projects. It's like signing a piece of art. Emma, who had stopped by during her lunch break, reached out to touch the initials with trembling fingers. "He never told me about this," she whispered. There was so much about his life here in Riverside that he kept close to his heart. The discovery sparked a new energy in the shop. Mike began documenting everything with renewed vigor, capturing not just the restoration process, but the small moments of connection and discovery that seemed to happen daily. The Parker Protocol's success had brought attention to their project, and people from neighboring towns often stopped by to witness the transformation taking place. "You know what we should do?" Mike suggested during a water break. "We should add our own marks right next to Daniel's, not to cover his up, but to show how his legacy continues. Tommy could add his initials and everyone who helped with the restoration." The idea resonated deeply with everyone. It wasn't just about leaving a mark on metal. It was about acknowledging the threads that connected past to present, stranger to family, loss to healing. As the afternoon progressed, Pastor Wilson arrived with unexpected news. "The Parker Protocol has been noticed by the National Firefighters Association," he announced. "They want to feature Riverside's story in their monthly magazine. They're especially interested in how the auto shop connection has created a unique angle for community building." The news spread quickly through town. By evening, the shop was packed with well-wishers and community members, each eager to share their part of the story. Carol brought a special cake decorated with tiny wrenches and firefighter helmets. Rachel from the diner organized an impromptu potluck. Even Bob Martinez showed up in his dress uniform, having just finished a presentation about the protocol at a neighboring police department. Among the visitors was Mary Chen, a reporter from the local newspaper who had been following the story since its beginning. "There's something special happening here," she observed, watching Tommy demonstrate his sanding technique to a group of visiting kids. "It's more than just restoring a car or helping a family. You're restoring faith in humanity." Jack nodded, thinking about how far they'd come since that cold morning when Emma's car broke down. "Sometimes the biggest repairs aren't the ones you can see," he replied. "They're the ones that happen in people's hearts." As the evening wound down, Tom Miller made another appearance, this time carrying a dusty old box. "Found these in my attic," he explained, setting the box down carefully. "All of Daniel's old training manuals, plus some photographs I thought you might want to have." The box became a treasure trove of memories. There were pictures of teenage Daniel learning to change oil, proud snapshots of his first solo repair, a job, and even a few of him in his early firefighter days, still wearing his mechanic's jacket over his uniform. Tommy sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully organizing each photograph, while Emma told stories about the ones she recognized. The shop filled with a comfortable mix of laughter and tears as memories were shared and connections deepened. "Look at this," Tom said, pulling out an old notebook. Daniel's journal from his apprenticeship days. He wrote about wanting to combine his love of fixing things with his desire to help people in emergency situations. That's when he first started thinking about becoming a firefighter. Jack watched as Tommy absorbed this new information about his father, seeing how each detail helped the boy understand the man who had shaped his life, even in absence. The restoration project had become more than just fixing an old car. It was rebuilding a bridge between father and son, past and present. As the evening drew to a close, something remarkable happened. Tommy approached Jack with a serious expression, holding his own notebook. "Mr. Jack, I wrote something. Could I read it to everyone?" The shop fell quiet as Tommy opened his notebook and began to read. "My dad fixed cars in this shop before he became a hero firefighter. Now I'm learning to fix cars too, but I'm also learning about how helping people is the most important repair job of all. Every time we fix something in this shop, we're fixing more than just cars. We're fixing hearts and helping people remember that they're not alone. The simple wisdom of Tommy's words touched everyone present. Emma wiped tears from her eyes as Pastor Wilson nodded approvingly. Jack felt a surge of pride, knowing that Daniel's legacy was living on in ways none of them could have imagined. "Tommy," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion, "your father would be so proud of how you're carrying on his work, both in mechanics and in helping others." The boy smiled, looking around at the family he had found in this unlikely place. "I know," he said confidently, "because every time I'm here, I feel like he's here too, teaching me through all of you." The late summer sun cast long shadows through Thompson's auto repair as Jack and Tommy worked on the Chevy's interior. The transformation was nearly complete. The engine purred perfectly, the body gleamed with fresh paint, and now they were tackling the final details that would bring Daniel Parker's first restoration project back to life. "Mr. Jack," Tommy called out, his voice muffled from where he was carefully cleaning under the dashboard, "I found something else." This had become a common occurrence during the restoration, each discovery adding another piece to the puzzle of Daniel's legacy. Jack knelt beside the open door as Tommy emerged, holding what appeared to be an old folded piece of paper that had been tucked behind the glove compartment. With careful fingers, they unfolded it together. The paper was yellowed with age, but the handwriting was unmistakably Daniel's. "It's a letter," Tommy whispered, his eyes wide. "Dad wrote it." Emma, who had been organizing the photo documentation with Mike, hurried over. The three of them huddled together as Jack began to read the letter aloud. "To whoever finds this, next, you're holding more than just a restoration project. You're holding a dream. Every bolt I tightened, every panel I replaced, taught me something about life. Tom Miller showed me that fixing cars isn't just about mechanics. It's about helping people get back on their way. As I finish this project, I'm starting my training to become a firefighter. Different tools, same purpose, helping others when they need it most. Take care of her. Daniel Parker." The shop fell silent as the words sank in. Emma wiped tears from her eyes while Tommy ran his hand along the car's dashboard, as if trying to feel his father's presence in the smooth surface. "We have to preserve this," Mike said, already reaching for his camera to document the discovery. "It's like he knew someone would find it someday." The letter's discovery sparked a new idea. Jack gathered everyone around, including Carol, Rachel, and Pastor Wilson, who had stopped by for their daily visit. "What if we each wrote our own letters about what this restoration has meant to us, what we've learned? We could place them with Daniel's letter for future generations to find." The suggestion was met with enthusiastic agreement. Soon, the shop's office table was covered with paper as everyone began writing. Tommy sat between Jack and Emma, his young face serious with concentration as he carefully wrote his own contribution. As they worked, Tom Miller arrived for his regular check-in on the project. Upon hearing about the letter, he sat down heavily in a nearby chair, his eyes misty. "Daniel used to do that with special projects," he explained. "Hide little messages, words of encouragement. Said it was his way of connecting with whoever would come after him." The afternoon took on a sacred quality as one by one they shared what they had written. Pastor Wilson spoke of divine timing and community strength. Rachel wrote about the power of small kindnesses. Bob Martinez reflected on how the Parker Protocol had transformed police and fire department relationships with their communities. Tommy's letter was simple but profound. "Dear future finder, this car helped me know my dad better. I hope it helps you remember that fixing things can fix hearts too." As the day progressed, more townspeople stopped by, each adding their own letters to the collection. The story of Daniel's hidden message had spread quickly through Riverside's grapevine, drawing people to the shop like moths to a flame. Mary Chen, the local reporter, arrived with an update on her coverage of the Parker Protocol. "The story's gone national," she announced. "Major news networks are interested in covering the unveiling ceremony. They're calling it a blueprint for community healing." Jack watched as Tommy proudly showed Mary the progress they'd made on the interior restoration. The boy had grown so much over the summer, not just in his mechanical skills, but in his understanding of his father's legacy. "You know," Tom Miller said quietly, standing beside Jack, "Daniel would be amazed by all this. He always wanted to make a difference in people's lives, but this is beyond anything he could have imagined." Emma joined them, holding Daniel's letter carefully in its protective sleeve. "Sometimes I think he did imagine it," she said softly. "Why else would he leave that letter? He knew the power of connection, of leaving something behind for others to find." As the evening approached, they gathered to decide where to place all the new letters. Tommy suggested creating a special compartment behind the restored glove box, accessible but hidden, just as his father had done. Mike, who had been documenting everything, spoke up. "We should make copies of all the letters, not just for our records, but for other communities implementing the Parker Protocol. Show them it's about more than just financial support. It's about creating lasting connections." The idea resonated with everyone. Pastor Wilson immediately offered the church's resources to help compile everything into a proper documentation package. Rachel and Carol began planning a special dinner for the unveiling ceremony, wanting to ensure that the community aspect of the project was properly celebrated. As they worked to carefully place the letters in their new home, Tommy suddenly looked up at Jack with tears in his eyes. "Mr. Jack, do you think Dad knew when he wrote his letter? Do you think he knew somebody like you would help us?" Jack pulled the boy into a hug, his own eyes misting over. "I think your dad knew that kindness has a way of finding its way back to people who need it. He started something here in this shop, something that's still growing and changing lives." Emma wrapped her arms around them both, creating a moment of connection that seemed to bridge past and present. The setting sun streamed through the shop windows, casting a golden glow over the restored Chevy that had become so much more than just a car. The morning of the Chevy's unveiling ceremony dawned bright and clear. Jack arrived at Thompson's auto repair before sunrise, his mind racing with all the preparations still needed. The restored car sat under a custom car cover in the center of the shop, every detail perfected over months of careful work. The transformation was stunning. The body gleamed with the exact shade of blue from Daniel's original restoration. The chrome sparkled, and the interior looked better than new. But it was the invisible details, the hidden letters, the carefully preserved memories, the love poured into every repair that made this project truly special. Tommy arrived early too, dressed in his best clothes, but still wearing his junior mechanic's apron. He'd insisted on doing one final check of everything before the ceremony. Jack watched with pride as the boy methodically went through the inspection. Routine they'd practiced together, his movements confident and precise. "Perfect timing," Mike called out, entering the shop with boxes of printed materials. The documentation of the restoration process had evolved into something bigger, a complete guide for implementing the Parker Protocol, filled with stories, photographs, and copies of the letters they'd found and written. Emma arrived next, carrying Tommy's original notebook. They'd decided to display it alongside the car, showing how the project had been seen through the eyes of Daniel Parker's son. The pages were filled with not just technical notes, but observations about community, healing, and the power of helping others. "The news vans are starting to arrive," Pastor Wilson announced, poking his head through the door. "And you won't believe who's here. the state fire marshal and representatives from 3 different firefighters associations. The quiet morning quickly transformed into organized chaos as the community mobilized for the ceremony. Carol and Rachel coordinated, an army of volunteers setting up chairs and refreshments in the parking lot. Bob Martinez directed traffic as people began arriving from neighboring towns. Mary Chen moved through the crowd, gathering quotes for her final article on the project. Tom Miller arrived wearing his old shop coat, the same one he'd worn while teaching Daniel. In his hands, he carried one last surprise, Daniel's original toolbox, carefully preserved all these years. "Found it in my basement," he explained, his voice rough with emotion. "Thought today would be the right time to pass it on." He handed the toolbox to Tommy, who received it with trembling hands. The crowd outside grew larger as the ceremony's start time approached. Jack looked out the shop window, amazed at the turnout. There were firefighters in dress uniforms, mechanics from other shops, families helped by the Parker Protocol, and what seemed like every resident of Riverside. "Mr. Jack," Tommy called softly, standing by the covered car. "Can we check the letters? One more time, make sure they're secure." Together, they opened the special compartment they'd created. Daniel's original letter sat at the top of the collection, followed by dozens more, each telling part of the story of how one broken-down car had sparked a movement of community support and healing. Emma joined them, placing her hand on the car's polished surface. "Danny would be so proud," she whispered. "Not just of the car, but of how his love for helping others has grown into something so much bigger." As the time for the unveiling approached, Pastor Wilson gathered everyone inside the shop for a quiet moment of reflection. "Before we share this with the world," he said, "let's remember how it all started, with one act of kindness on a cold morning." The ceremony itself exceeded all expectations. As Tommy and Jack pulled the cover off the Chevy, the crowd gasped at its beauty. But it was the stories that followed, told by Emma, Jack, Tommy, and others touched by the Parker Protocol, that truly captured the project's significance. The state fire marshal announced that the protocol would be formally recommended for implementation across the state. Representatives from other communities shared how they'd already seen its impact. But the most powerful moment came when Tommy stepped forward to read from his notebook. "When my dad worked in this shop," he began, his young voice clear and strong, "he learned that fixing cars was really about helping people. When he became a firefighter, he used that same idea to save lives. Now, through the Parker Protocol, we're all learning how to help each other in bigger ways." As Tommy spoke, Jack noticed something remarkable happening in the crowd. People were reaching out to hold hands, sharing tissues, offering supportive smiles to strangers. The barriers that often divide communities had melted away, replaced by a shared understanding of what it means to truly support one another. The ceremony concluded with an unexpected announcement. The town council had voted to establish a scholarship fund in Daniel Parker's name, supporting young people pursuing careers in both automotive technology and emergency services. "Because sometimes," the mayor explained, "the best way to save lives is to fix what's broken, whether it's a car, a system, or a heart." As the crowd began to disperse, many lingering to take closer looks at the car and share their own stories, Jack found himself standing with Emma, Tommy, and Tom Miller by the shop's entrance. "You know what this means," Tom said, watching the interactions happening around them. "This shop will never be just a repair garage again. It's become something more, a symbol of hope, a reminder that community matters." Jack nodded, thinking about how much had changed since that winter morning when Emma's car broke down. "Sometimes the biggest repairs happen in ways we never expect," he replied. Tommy, still holding his father's toolbox, looked up at them. Can we do more restorations, Mr. Jack? Help more people? The question brought smiles to everyone's faces. Even as they celebrated the completion of one project, the boy was already thinking about how to help others. 6 months after the Chevy's unveiling ceremony, Thompson's auto repair had evolved into something unique. While still a working garage, it had become a touchstone for communities across the country implementing their own versions of the Parker Protocol. The restored Chevy, now a symbol of hope and community support, sat proudly in a special display area when it wasn't being used for fundraising events. On this particular morning, Jack arrived to find Tommy already waiting, bouncing with excitement. Today was special. They were launching a new initiative inspired by their experience with the Chevy's restoration. "Is everything ready, Mr. Jack?" Tommy asked, clutching his ever-present notebook. Over the past months, that single notebook had grown into a collection, each filled with mechanical knowledge and observations about helping others. "Almost," Jack replied, unlocking the shop. "Mike's bringing the last of the supplies now." They'd transformed part of the garage into a teaching space where they would offer free basic car maintenance classes to families in need. It was Tommy's idea, sparked by his own journey of learning and healing through mechanics. Emma arrived shortly after, carrying a box of newly printed manuals. She'd taken on the role of program coordinator, balancing it with her work at the community center. The Parker Protocol had grown beyond their initial expectations, and managing its various initiatives had become a full-time commitment for many in the community. "First group arrives in an hour," she announced, setting down the box. 15 families, all referred through the protocol's network. And guess who's coming to help teach? Right on cue, Tom Miller's truck pulled into the parking lot. The retired mechanic had become a regular presence at the shop, his wealth of experience proving invaluable as they expanded their community programs. "Couldn't miss this," Tom said, entering the shop. "Daniel always talked about teaching others. This feels right." As they prepared for the class, Jack reflected on how much had changed. The shop's walls now held not just tools and parts, but stories. Photos of families helped by the Parker Protocol, letters from communities implementing their own support programs, news articles about the movement that had started with one broken-down car. Rachel arrived from the diner with coffee and breakfast for everyone, followed by Carol with fresh pastries. These morning gatherings had become a ritual, a daily reminder of how their community had grown stronger through supporting one another. "Got some news," Pastor Wilson called out, hurrying through the door. The National Firefighters Association wants to feature the shop in their upcoming documentary about community support programs. They're calling it The Ripple Effect, how one act of kindness changed American communities. The news was met with excitement, but there was work to be done. Their first group of students began arriving, single parents, elderly residents, young people starting their first jobs. Each had a story, each had been touched by hardship, and each had found hope through the Parker Protocol. Tommy, wearing his junior mechanic's apron with pride, took his place beside Jack as they began the class. They started with basic maintenance. Oil changes, tire rotation, battery care, but like Daniel had discovered years ago, the lessons went far beyond mechanics. "It's not just about fixing cars," Tommy explained to the group, his confidence growing with each word. "It's about helping each other. When my dad worked in this shop, he learned that every repair is a chance to make someone's life better." As the morning progressed, something remarkable happened. The students began sharing their own stories, forming connections, offering support to one another. A young mother who'd lost her husband found understanding from a retired firefighter. A teenager struggling to care for his disabled parent received offers of help from others in the group. During a break, Mary Chen arrived to document the class for her ongoing coverage of the protocol's impact. "You've started something revolutionary here," she observed, watching the interactions. These aren't just car maintenance classes, they're community building sessions. Jack nodded, thinking about how Daniel's legacy had evolved. Every time we teach someone to fix something, he said, we're really teaching them they're not alone. The afternoon brought another surprise. A group of firefighters from a neighboring state arrived, eager to learn about implementing their own version of the Parker Protocol. They gathered around the restored Chevy, listening as Tommy proudly shared its story. The car is important, the boy explained, showing them the hidden compartment with the letters, but the real restoration happened in people's hearts. That's what my dad would have wanted. Emma watched her son with tears of pride in her eyes. The shy, grieving boy who had arrived in Riverside with a broken-down car had transformed into a confident young man, carrying his father's legacy forward in his own unique way. As the day drew to a close, Jack found himself standing with Tom Miller, watching Tommy demonstrate proper tool maintenance to a group of enthusiastic learners. "You know what Daniel would love most about all this?" Tom asked, his voice thick with emotion. "It's not just the helping, it's the teaching others to help. That's how real change happens." The setting sun cast long shadows through the shop windows, highlighting the Chevy's polished chrome. The car that had once represented one man's journey from mechanic to firefighter now stood as a symbol of how communities could come together to support their own. "Mr. Jack," Tommy called out excitedly, "can we tell them about the new program?" Jack smiled, nodding his approval. They had recently decided to expand their initiative, partnering with local technical schools to offer scholarships for students interested in both automotive technology and emergency services. "Because sometimes," Tommy announced to the gathered crowd, "the best way to help others is to teach them how to help themselves. That's what my dad believed, and that's what we believe too." Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to catch our next installment. Leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts on how teaching others can create lasting change in communities. Have you ever experienced the joy of passing on knowledge that helped someone in need? 1 year had passed since Emma's car first broke down at Thompson's auto repair. The autumn leaves painted Riverside in shades of gold and crimson as Jack opened the shop on a particularly significant morning. Today marked the launch of their most ambitious project yet, the Daniel Parker Memorial Training Center. The expansion had transformed the vacant lot next to the original shop into a state-of-the-art facility where the Parker Protocol's principles of community support and technical training would be taught to representatives from across the country. The restored Chevy held pride of place in the new building's entrance hall, a testament to the power of community and healing. Tommy arrived early as usual, but today he wasn't alone. A group of young people his age accompanied him, the first class of what they called the Parker Pioneers, a youth program combining automotive training with community service. "Everyone ready?" Tommy asked his peers, his confidence remarkable for someone so young. The other kids nodded eagerly, each wearing the same style of junior mechanic's apron that had become Tommy's trademark. Emma watched from the doorway, her eyes misty with pride. "Danny would never believe this," she whispered to Jack, his son teaching others about both mechanics and helping people. "It's like he's here with us." The morning ceremony would mark not just the opening of the new facility, but the official launch of a national network of Parker Protocol Centers. Representatives from fire departments, police stations, and community organizations across the country had gathered to witness what had grown from one simple act of kindness. Mike, now the lead instructor for the technical training program, bustled around making last-minute adjustments. The years of documenting the Chevy's restoration had given him a unique perspective on how to teach both the technical and human aspects of their work. "First groups arriving," he called out as a bus pulled into the parking lot. "Looks like the team from Chicago made it." The visitors filed in, their expressions a mix of curiosity and awe as they took in the facility. The walls told the story of the Parker Protocol through photos, news clippings, and personal testimonials. At the center of it all stood the Chevy, its restored beauty a physical representation of hope and community spirit. Tom Miller, despite his advancing years, had insisted on being present. He stood near the car, ready to share first-hand accounts of teaching Daniel Parker and watching the legacy of those lessons expand beyond anything they could have imagined. "Welcome to the Daniel Parker Memorial Training Center," Jack began, addressing the gathered crowd. "What you see around you started with a broken-down car and a mysterious phone call, but it's grown into something much more, a movement of communities supporting each other through times of crisis and change." As Jack spoke, Tommy and his fellow Parker pioneers demonstrated basic maintenance techniques, showing how technical skills could be taught alongside lessons about community service and support. The young people moved with confidence, their training evident in every careful movement. The Parker Protocol isn't just about financial support or technical training, Emma added, stepping forward. It's about recognizing that every challenge is an opportunity to build stronger communities. When my car broke down that morning, I thought I had reached my lowest point. Instead, I found a community that would lift not just me, but countless others. Throughout the day, visitors rotated through various stations, learning about different aspects of the program. Pastor Wilson led sessions on community outreach and support network development. Bob Martinez demonstrated how law enforcement agencies could integrate the protocol into their community service programs. Rachel and Carol shared insights about mobilizing local businesses to support families in need. But it was Tommy's presentation that truly captured the essence of their mission. Standing beside his father's restored Chevy, he shared how the process of learning mechanics had helped him heal from his loss and find a new purpose. "Every tool in this shop tells a story," he explained, holding up his father's old wrench. "But the most important tools we have are the ones we carry in our hearts: kindness, understanding, and the willingness to help others." As the afternoon progressed, something remarkable happened. The visitors began sharing their own stories of loss, hope, and community support. The training center transformed into a space of healing and connection, exactly as they had envisioned. Mary Chen, who had documented their journey from the beginning, moved through the crowd, gathering final quotes for her upcoming book about the Parker Protocol. "What started in this small town," she observed, "is becoming a blueprint for community healing across the nation." Near the end of the day, a surprise visitor arrived, the widow of the family Daniel had saved in his final act of heroism. She had traveled from across the country to see firsthand what had grown from his legacy of helping others. "Your husband's sacrifice saved my family," she told Emma, their tears mingling as they embraced. "And now, through this program, he's still saving people, just in a different way." The impact of her words resonated through the room. Jack watched as Tommy approached the two women, offering them both a set of commemorative keys to the Chevy, symbolic reminders that hope can be found even in the darkest moments. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the training center's windows, Jack gathered everyone for a final moment of reflection. The restored Chevy gleamed in the fading light, its surface reflecting the faces of all those who had come together to create something extraordinary. "This center," he said, his voice carrying the weight of the journey they'd shared, "is more than just a building. It's a testament to the power of community, to the legacy of a man who believed in helping others, and to the countless lives that will be touched by what we've built here together." 2 years had passed since the morning Emma's car broke down at Thompson's Auto Repair. The Daniel Parker Memorial Training Center had become a beacon of hope, drawing visitors from across the country. But today was special. They were celebrating the 100th community to implement the Parker Protocol. The morning dawned crisp and clear, much like the day this journey began. Jack stood in the doorway of the original shop, now preserved as a living museum alongside the modern training facility. The restored Chevy sat in its place of honor, its blue paint gleaming in the early light. Tommy, now taller and more confident, worked with a group of younger children, teaching them basic tool safety. He'd grown into his role as lead youth instructor, carrying his father's legacy forward in ways no one could have predicted. "Hard to believe how far we've come," Emma said, joining Jack at the doorway. She'd recently been appointed as the National Director of the Parker Protocol Network, coordinating efforts across the country. "Sometimes I still expect to wake up and find it was all a dream." The day's celebration would bring together representatives from every community that had implemented the protocol, along with families whose lives had been touched by its support. The parking lot filled early as people arrived from across the nation, each carrying their own stories of how this small-town initiative had transformed their communities. Mike, who now headed the technical training program, had prepared a special presentation chronicling the protocol's evolution. "Look at this," he called out, showing Jack the latest statistics. Over 10,000 families supported, 25 new training centers opened, and countless lives touched. Tom Miller, though retired, still visited regularly to share the original vision with new communities. Today, he sat near the Chevy, surrounded by eager listeners as he told stories about teaching young Daniel Parker the value of combining technical skills with compassion. "The real magic," he explained to the gathered crowd, "wasn't just in fixing cars. It was in understanding that every repair was an opportunity to help someone in need." As the celebration began, Pastor Wilson led a moment of reflection. The shop that had once been just a local garage had become sacred ground, a place where broken things, whether machines or spirits, found healing. Tommy stepped forward to share his perspective. "When my dad worked in this shop, he learned that helping others was the greatest gift you could give. Through the Parker Protocol, we're not just honoring his memory, we're building on his dream of making the world a better place." The day unfolded with presentations from various communities. A police chief from Seattle shared how the protocol had transformed their approach to community support. A firefighter from Houston described how their implementation had created lasting bonds between emergency services and local residents. But the most powerful moments came from the families themselves. One by one, they stood to share how the protocol had touched their lives. A young widow spoke of finding hope through the community support network. A retired veteran described how the free maintenance classes had given him both practical skills and a sense of purpose. Mary Chen, who had documented their journey from the beginning, revealed the title of her upcoming book, The Ripple Effect: How One Act of Kindness Transformed a Nation. The story of Thompson's auto repair and the Parker Protocol would soon reach an even wider audience. As afternoon approached, Jack gathered everyone around the Chevy for a special announcement. "Today we're launching the next phase of our mission," he began. "The Parker Protocol Foundation will provide grants to help communities start their own training centers. Every town should have a place where people can find both practical help and emotional support." The news was met with enthusiastic applause. Emma stepped forward to add her own announcement, a scholarship program for children of first responders, supporting their dreams whether in mechanical training or emergency services. "Because sometimes," she said, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd, "the best way to honor a legacy is to help others build their own." Tommy's contribution to the day's announcements brought tears to many eyes. He and his fellow Parker pioneers had developed a youth mentorship program. pairing children who had lost parents with caring adults skilled in trades and emergency services. My dad taught me through his example that helping others heals our own hearts, Tommy explained. Now we want to help other kids find that same healing. As the sun began to set on the celebration, Jack found himself back at the shop's entrance, watching the interactions between visitors from across the country, the sight of strangers becoming friends, of communities learning from each other, of hope spreading like ripples in a pond. It was beyond anything he could have imagined that cold morning 2 years ago. You know what Danny would love most about all this? Emma asked, joining him in the doorway. It's not just the helping, it's how it keeps growing, touching more lives, creating more connections. Tom Miller added his own observation. Daniel always said that the best tools in any shop were kindness and compassion. Look around, those tools are being used more than ever. The restored Chevy, witness to it all, seemed to glow in the evening light. The car that had once represented one man's journey now stood as a symbol of how a community's love could transform countless lives. As the celebration drew to a close, Tommy gathered everyone for one final moment. Standing beside his father's car, he shared the words that had become the protocol's guiding principle. Every breakdown is an opportunity for a breakthrough. Every repair is a chance to rebuild not just machines, but hope. And every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this story of community, healing, and the power of kindness touched your heart, you won't want to miss these upcoming features. Just click and see how other remarkable acts of kindness are transforming lives across the country. Don't forget to subscribe and share this story with someone who needs a reminder that hope can be found in the most unexpected places. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on how one act of kindness changed your life or your community. Remember, in every garage, in every community, there's an opportunity to fix more than what's broken. There's a chance to rebuild hearts, restore hope, and create lasting change that ripples through generations.